Okay, hello, and welcome to this sort of deep dive songwriting explanation thingy of our track called Eldritch Rhythm. Um, so I'm just going to be sort of talking about how this idea got started and to hopefully sort of show a bit of insight into our process-ish. I'm just going to sort of go on about it in a semi-waffly manner. Um, and just sort of talk through how I would have got started on this. So the basic idea that I had in my head was that I wanted the track to have this kind of jungle stroke drum and bass, or like early kind of 90s and 2000s early jungle drum and bass, kind of like LTJ Bookham and Photech kind of feel to it almost, where it's like got that kind of aquatic thing in the keys and like a lot of choppy, shuffly drums. So yeah, the drums um, definitely came out of like a jungle and drum and bass sort of place to start off with. But I wanted to have this sense of the pattern kind of speeding up and slowing down at certain points in the phrasing, and kind of as if like the drummer's just getting bored at the end of the phrase and like just almost giving up, and like the groove's just like collapsing in on itself kind of thing at certain times. Um, the other idea in it was to sort of have this sense of it kind of like in addition to that being sort of slightly unpredictable and having a feel that it's sort of in like an odd time signature without ever actually coming out of 4/4. So yeah, that was another one of the sort of ideas in there. So that's basically um, what was going into it. The other thing I suppose that's important to mention is at the time when I came up with this groove, I was really obsessed with this like specific note spacing that I'll go into in a little bit. But yeah, it was basically these three ideas. So it was like kind of a jungle groove that feels like it's speeding up and slowing down, and is in an odd time signature when it's actually not. Um, and also, yeah, this sort of specific note phrasing that I'll get to in a little bit. But yeah, basically, just to start out with, um, I will basically start out by programming drums in using addictive drums. So basically, I do actually have a kit there, but I don't use. I basically just have that for practice because it sounds crap, and I don't really have enough mics here to record it well. So I don't actually ever use that for recording. It's just like a practice kit. And anyway, I'm not particularly good at drums. I've only really been practicing for about a year now or so. So I basically just use this to get my ideas down into software so that I can work on it further, essentially. Um, I guess before I go any further, uh, I sometimes just get little beats and little ideas would just pop into my head, and that was the case with the start of this track. So I'll just get an idea for a beat and it will pop into my head, and then I'll catch myself sort of beatboxing it. Um, and it will be a little bit cringe of me to do it now, but for example, I would have just had the first piece of the phrase of the drums in this track pop into my head, and it would have just been I would have gone like randomly when I'm making a cup of tea in the kitchen or something like that, you know. And then I kind of catch myself doing this sometimes, and I go like, wait, well, like what did I just do? And I kind of try to remember what I just did and then slow it down and break it down in terms of like what the mouth noises I'm making are supposed to represent. Um, so obviously, like a is a kick, is a snare, and is a hi hat, and you can sort of hear where I'm putting like ghost notes in and doing like that sort of jungle hi hat, ghost note, snare accent thing, like that sort of thing. So I I will just sort of slow down what I've done, map it in my head, and then map it into software. So I've got it down here basically. So just to show you what I'm working with, again, obviously I'm using Addictive Drums. The reason I like using this is because it's really flexible. You can change the drum sounds a lot. I'll give you a quick demo of what this sort of sounds like. Yeah, so that's like the obvious kit sound that they load you up with at default. I've actually got my own kit set up here that I've made ahead of time. Just so I just have this so I can quickly load it up, so I don't have to waste time like messing around, like changing settings and getting a sound. So this kit's kind of inspired by like Richard Spaven and sort of these jazz UK almost drum and bass jungle drummers. People like Yusuf Kamal come to mind, and all that sort of thing. So it's kind of inspired by that. All really dry sounds, not much decay on any of the drums. I'll just play you the same pattern but with this kit, so you can. Oh, sorry, hang on. That'd be helpful if it was at normal speed. Let's try that again. Cool. So yeah, I just like that as a rough starting place. So in the piano roll, I'll show you just quickly where like the hits are mapped to. So obviously the kick's on C1, and then going up it's snares. And we get to hi-hats. Hi-hats in different degrees of openness here. I need to increase the release of my hi-hat so that we hear it run out a bit more. Cool. So now that will ring out longer because it's less choked. And then obviously going up at C3, here's a ride. And then you've got ride bell, etc., etc. And this is a closed to close the, if you were to grab the ride, you know. So and then you've got toms going further up, but yeah, I don't ever really honestly use toms in my programming, to be honest. I tend to just stick to kick, hi-hat, snare to get the idea down. Okay, so before I go any further, I think I'll just explain that thing about the note spacing that I mentioned. So yeah, I was obsessed with this at the time. You'll see why, hang on. So it's basically to do with leaving this 2/16th note gap between kick accents. I was a bit obsessed with this particular thing at the time because it was a detail I noticed in a few tunes that I was really enjoying at the time. I basically just wanted to nab it because I was like, oh, that'd be really fun to like play live. Essentially, it's a satisfying thing. I think you'll kind of hear why if I just copy this out. And I'll just literally stagger it onto like random bits. So I'm not doing this with any sort of rhyme or reason. It's completely random. Let me grab that, copy it over, and if I play this against the metronome, you'll hear this note spacing is just really cool at this vague sort of tempo, because you'll hear sort of what it does around the beat. I think it's almost kind of like an African rhythm type thing, but yeah, anyway, here we go. Cool, now I've explained that, I can start just showing you how I would have started making this beat, essentially. So, yeah. So I would have started with that first part of the pattern, which is obviously like... So I'm like, well, what am I doing there? That is meant to be an open hi-hat. And I can hear that I'm closing it on the second beat of the bar. So, sorry, I obviously messed that up, and I'll stop doing this because I know it sounds terrible. But yeah, that is there. So, that's what that is. So, cool. And then, obviously, the next part is like which would be hi-hat, ghost note, snare accent. So, oh yeah, I should probably just point out as well, I don't think I mentioned, but if I grab this tool here, which is the velocity tool, and if I pull that down, you can hear I'm, yeah, bang, bang, bang. It's just how hard the note's being hit, basically. So when combining all of these elements, you can sort of start to get a jungly sound. So one more bass drum there, and then a big snare accent here. So it should be no. Take that bass drum out. Cool, close enough. And then the next thing I would have done immediately after that is I would have tried to figure a place for this note grouping to happen. So I probably just would have gone at random. I would have just stuck that in like that after this snare here. And I would have just fiddled, like moving this around until I basically found a spot where it lands that I find like satisfying. Essentially, that's basically it. Yeah, see, that just doesn't do it for me. I'll try that. That feels good. And then it was a case of just placing another lot down after that and seeing where it felt good. See, it could. There's no reason why it can't do that, but yeah, I'm just sort of trying to find something that I specifically like the sound of. It's kind of elusive and difficult to explain. It's just a taste thing, I guess, isn't it? It's like what you like. So that is actually what it does in the real track. And then I basically would have just copied that. And the second time this happens, then these accents do something different to what they did in the previous bar. That's the basic formula for like keeping it interesting, I guess. So I'm just going to shift them all left 1/16th note, and I'll see what happens. Cool. Yeah. So yeah, the other thing that I should try to explain. What was the other thing? Yeah, that was it. Sorry. Trying to get that feel of it being in an odd time signature kind of thing. One of the easy ways that you can do that is to simply just take your one accent. Oh, sorry, didn't scroll up that far. Just take your one and just move it to the off, so it's on, so it comes back in on the offbeat. I'll just play you what that sounds like, or I won't turn the metronome on. I'll use another hi-hat to simulate that. And you could mess around with this sort of the phrasing of this kick and snare afterwards if you wanted it to sound more weird and more pushed. But yeah, the thing about our sort of implementation of weird grooves and like unusual accenting is we still kind of want it to be, even if we use an odd time signature or a strange phrasing, we always kind of want our grooves to be like followable in terms of like you can just nod your head to it and it shouldn't ever really like throw that action too much, because we want people to just be able to groove and head nod to it, but at the same time have this kind of like yeah, just like weirdness and kind of non-standard grooves going on, but still like be followable. So weird, but like not too weird, I guess this is the aim of the game. Yeah. So something I would have done then is I think I was feeling that this pushed accent here was abrupt, and I kind of wanted it to feel abrupt and out of nowhere, but almost not too much. I wanted something from the previous bar to like tether or lead your ear into it from before then. So I think I just did another like, I would have programmed it in initially like this. It just would have been probably another hi-hat, like ghost note run kind of thing. So it's hang on. I've just got to remind myself what the pattern is. So it starts there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, cool. So I am in the right place. Sorry. So see what happens. Yeah. So you can tell. I don't know. At the moment, I actually think that sounds like kind of, and I think Barney would know that as well. So this is kind of how do I explain this? So this to me sounds like really programmed and probably not like what a real drummer would actually do. And when I send this part eventually to Barney, he kind of knows that. I think there's sort of I think we both kind of know the points in the pattern that I'm saying are meant to be used and final, and then there's other bits like this kind of fill that are meant to just be more illustrative of an idea. So, for example, um, I'm not with this phrasing here. I'm not necessarily saying to Barney like, "Oh, what you should play is hi hat ghost note, hi hat ghost note." It's more just to explain the fact that he's got um, 8/16 notes to play before this accent here, and he could, for example, take any one of those. That you could make them all hi hats, which is like, I don't know. I reckon that's pretty boring to be honest, but yeah, you could do that. Again, doesn't sound great, but if you imagine every single one of these hits split up linear, so you play a different piece of the kit with every hit, then you can probably get something really interesting happening. So if I just for example chuck that up onto a tom, I'm going to make that a kick. Let's make that there we go, this sort of click. And let's so that kind of thing, it's just a guideline, and obviously I know that Barney can kind of make it sound cooler than I can with programming. So yeah, there's a bit of this which is sort of like obviously this pattern is kind of established. We want this to be the same every time we play it, but then when we get to little moments like that, there's obviously some leeway for what we can do on a real kit. Anyway, carrying on, the other thing I think to address was that bit about the groove feeling like it's breaking down or slowing down at a certain point. So an easy way to do that is to just grab some accents and just chuck them in triplets. So that's basically what we're doing a lot on this track, is going between 16th note speed, like digga 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 digga, and then going into 16th note, no, 8th note triplets. Yeah, something we like to do is to take all the accents in the project, like everything, all the kicks, the bass accents, the keys, the guitars, whatever, and then have them all landing on these weird, like 8th note triplet accents, basically. And that's how you get this sort of herky jerky stabbing thing happening. So if I just copy this out a second time, sorry. So basically, the second time this happens, once we get through to the end here at these last two kicks, we can just grab them and chuck them into triplets with quantization. Bang. And you can see all it did there was move this little kick off. So you can see that's now gone slightly off grid where it was there before. So I'll give you a quick demo. To actually make that more flattering and slightly more obvious what it's doing, I'm going to pepper in a few more notes. Cool. So if I grab those and I hit quantize, now they're all slightly quantized. Cool. Let's give that a listen from the top. It's not obviously as satisfying or doesn't sound as good as it does in the actual track, because I think it's maybe even, they might be like there, you know, or something like that. I can't remember it exactly right off the top of my head at this point. But yeah, that's kind of how we start shaping this groove. The other thing that I feel is a small detail, but is actually quite important, is sometimes like less is more, and leaving spaces in your pattern, I think anyway, can like make it slightly more interesting. So rather than having these, I guess you could refer to it as like a ligament or connective tissue with these hi-hats here that are going to tie your ear over into the next bar. Wait until we get to it. It's just to get rid of those. Just get rid of them and do it again here. And it's a simple thing, but like I really like love these kind of gaps in rhythms, and I feel like if you're occupying space the whole time, then the times when you are is less interesting in a way. So if you've just got constant, I find like 16th note rushes and it's all fast all the time, I get really bored, and I like gaps to keep it interesting. I don't know if it does actually make it more interesting. I'll let you decide. But you can see, like, hopefully the feel of the groove's not so weird and throwy, because, you know, you're left with that last hit, but you can still carry on your head bobs into the next bit, so it kind of keeps you grooving even though there's nothing going on there. I don't know, I think that's kind of cool. Anyway, the next thing, once I've got like 8 bars or so like this, I'm usually ready to just start trying out other sounds over it. And to be honest, that's not always true. Like, depending on, I mean, it's kind of, the process is a bit different on every track in terms of how we put them together. So there are some cases where I will literally have an entire song's worth of a drum pattern in my head, and like all the phrasings and the stabs and stuff, like I will have the whole thing kind of in my brain before I've even started, and then I'll map out the whole song of just drums and then write stuff to it like that kind of thing, you know. So the drums a lot of the time are the thing that come first in our tunes, but not always. I mean, sometimes it comes from a guitar riff, and then we figure out drums to go to that, but a lot of the time it is like a rhythmically based thing, and we'll start with these drums. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I sort of waffled there a bit. Yeah, so once I've got that, I'm usually ready to start, rather, trying out just chords and seeing what they sound like over it. And I'll often just initially draw for a kind of like electric piano Rhodes kind of sound, just as a starting place. A lot of the time, I don't necessarily always. Sometimes these sounds will stay and they will remain in the final version of the track, and other times they're just kind of like placeholders. It's just quick, you know. So it just doesn't take me long Sorry, that was a horrible chord. It doesn't take me long to get the idea down, and then, you know, once I've got a skeleton, I'll come back through later and like tweak whatever the plugin or the sound is, so that it's actually kind of what I imagined it to be. So that stuff can take time, and it will just slow you down. You know, messing around with patch settings whilst you're just trying to get an idea down is like not good for workflow. So you want to keep that stuff to a minimum, basically. Yeah. Anyway, I know. I love this chord shape. I use it like all the time, and it just kind of immediately evokes that sort of like aquatic jungle thing to me. And even more so, I'm just going to go straight ahead and put a Valhalla vintage verb on it, which is my favourite go-to reverb. And this modulation depth knob is your secret weapon. It makes it, that'll introduce sort of pitch fluctuations in the reverb tail, so you get this really nice, almost like detuning effect. And the actual quality, the sound quality of the reverb is just really, really gorgeous, and yeah, it's really lush. So I'll just play you the chords, you probably recognise it. But yeah, you can do fun things with that, like... So yeah. And I would have just plopped that in, I think, like this. No, you know what? I'm wrong. That's not the shape. The correct shape for this track is... No. Well, this is embarrassing. Sorry, we'll get there. That's the one. That's the boy. Cool, so obviously, yeah, that's pretty boring at the moment, but you can kind of hear where the track's starting to come from. Next thing is, I would have just tried to get like a bass layer in there, just to make it slightly more satisfying for me whilst I'm making it. So an easy way to do that is to just duplicate the drum pattern. I'm going to load up a bass patch just using Logic's EXS24 sampler. This is a built-in. This comes with Logic, so it's obviously... I mean, a lot of these sounds tend to be really lame and not usable for a real purpose. It's just good for demoing and getting something down quickly. So I do actually have a bass there, but I can't be asked to plug it in and record it. So I'm just going to grab the drums MIDI, delete everything except for the kick. Do that. And now, I think that's, yeah, this is an E. So just shift that up. Cool. And then I'm basically just going to go through and make it follow the groove a little bit more, basically. So. Cool. So you always want to leave this little gap of space between stabs. again, make that slightly more interesting. Let's just take that bass note and put it on the octave above. Cool. Sorry, whilst I'm here, I just want to point out something else that you can do quickly with MIDI and like stabs phrasing that's really cool and kind of experimental. If I just grab both of these tracks, so I've highlighted both the drums and the bass, right? And if I grab this whole chunk, and say if I'm like, actually I'm going to leave that one alone, move these all over, quantize it again. I'm actually going to add an extra note there just so it's not quite so weird. Yeah, so you can do really cool things with your phrasing easily and just try out other ideas that you might not necessarily think of or ever actually, if you're like messing around playing this on a bass or a kit, you might not necessarily think or be even aware of doing these sorts of things. So yeah, sometimes I'll just grab a random bit of the phrasing, and if you imagine if I had like keys there as well, and like other MIDI that was also stabbing in rhythm with that, and then you can move them all around together as a group. It's really cool for just like seeing what other like mental phrasings you can come up with, basically. So. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so once we've got that far, I will basically try to start getting a sort of vague like song structure in place, just so I don't get bored listening to the same kind of like verse pattern over and over again. So yeah, if I just join these all up, if you imagine that this chunk is going to be like our verse pattern, then I'll copy that out and I'll just start moving some notes around and stuff to try and get some sort of like feeling of an emotional change or that kind of thing. Yeah, I should probably also point out that whilst me and Barney know like a lot about like rhythm theory and sort of stuff to do with anything to do with drums and rhythm and like odd time signatures and weird techniques in rhythm, we know a lot about that kind of thing, but we don't actually know anything about well, very little about like notation theory and like chord theory and all that sort of side of like the melodic side of theory. We don't actually have any education in it. We're both self-taught musicians, so yeah, I couldn't tell you like what key this song is or what the scale is or anything like that. I couldn't name that chord shape for you, this sort of thing. So that might sound a bit weird to some people, but yeah, we basically just choose melodies. It's all from our ear, and like the emotion that it creates, and like this, like there's always, obviously there's not lyrics in our music, but we always like there to be the sense of like a sort of journey or a narrative progression, but without actual words or a strict like narrative being in place. It's just to kind of create a journey or a sort of dialogue kind of thing, so yeah, notes and chords and things like that are always chosen for what they do to your ear and how they make you feel, and that's how we know how to navigate it, basically. So yeah, you probably know more about theory than us. If you had any questions about that, I probably won't know how to answer them for you. So yeah, it's all just done on feel. And to that end, what I'll usually do for like a chorus bit is I'll just copy out the same thing and move the bass root note around underneath this chord without changing it. And I'll just move it and see like where it sounds cool, so for some reason I didn't get it. No, does nothing for me. Let's try that. See, that does a thing, you know. I don't really know how to explain what that thing is. It's just like, yeah, it's one of those elusive things that you can't really describe with words. It's an emotional thing. So yeah, I don't know. It just feels like it's moved somewhere, and obviously I know where the notes are, because I've already made this track, so it's hard for me to do anything outside of what the track does, because I'm drawn to it now. But yeah, in the process of making it, I would have literally just slid things around like this, to see what was satisfying. I think it's that. And I think you can kind of hear there that like where the bass is landing on this D, and sort of where it is towards this end of the bar. I don't know about you, but I can sort of hear that it naturally wants to go back to this E. So I can hear that in my head before I've even done it, you know. So when I get to here, I've already anticipated the next moment, because this has created the context for me, if that makes sense. By putting it there, it's led my ear. So that's kind of how we're making these decisions, I guess. And then you want something else to happen here, so it could go back down, I think. Oh, let's move that down. It could do that. Or that's what it actually does in the real tune. So give that a go. And to save me moving all of these bass notes again, I'm just going to cut the halfway point, copy this over again. So I've got my chorus bass line twice, and as we did with the formula with the drums earlier, you know, you don't want these like moments repeating themselves too much. So let's say the second time you hear this F sharp note with the octave note in there, the second time you hear it, let's have it do something different. So I'm just going to move it up a semitone. Okay, so it's just little things like this. Ba, 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 ba. And then back to verse. So that's looping nicely. You know, that kind of feels a bit like a mini song structure in its own right. And then the basic formula is to go back to the verse and now start introducing variations in the next verse and different things that happen. That's kind of a basic formula trick for you. So that is more or less it for like how we start, or how I start an idea anyway. It's not always like this, obviously it's a different process sort of for every track. I'm just explaining it for this one in particular, but yeah, these are a lot of the techniques and kind of ideas that go into things a lot of the time. So the only other thing to explain, I guess, that is a little different depending on what the track is. For example, I might sometimes write this much of the track and then get up to here and just get stuck. I'll just get writer's block. I won't know how to proceed with it or like where it should go. And when that happens, I will basically export all of these layers out individually. So I'll render that as its own file, that as its own file, and these as its own file, and then I send them to Barney so he can open them up in a Logic project like this in his home studio in Bristol, so that he can work on the track in the same way, you know. So we both kind of work on it in Logic and write and record that way, and then obviously he'll sort of like, if it's drums, he'll listen and look at the MIDI and kind of like work out how to do it on kit, and then also bring interesting ideas to it. So we kind of write it in software and then have to learn it on our instruments a lot of the time, rather than it being something that we've written on an instrument and then recorded in, you know. So like because obviously, yeah, I've written this bass line as MIDI basically, so I would have to then pick up the bass and work out how I'm going to play it on a real instrument, for example. So that's kind of how it works. It's a bit backwards, but yeah. There are other circumstances where like I might have had the whole track written already. For example, one of the tracks on the album, which is called Scepter, was actually that was one that I made and basically completely finished the whole structure for in like 2016. So by the time like Barney had joined the project, like that track in particular was already like fully fleshed out, and then he just basically learned the drums and what the synths, what the keys parts were, and then just embellished it and added layers with his own synths and stuff like that, basically. Other times, for the rest of the album, it was pretty much very like a very much a 50-50 split on who wrote what. So for example, in this track I did about that much, and then Barney would have done the next chunk, for example, and then he would have got up to a certain point with that and gone like, right, like I don't know where to go, kind of thing. So then he sends it back to me. Yeah, and we just keep doing this back and forth basically, of sending each other the files, the audio and also the MIDI, because I can export I can export, you know, all these chords here, so that he can just load up this exact thing in his own Logic project, and then he can swap out the sounds. He can look at what the notes in the chords are, because obviously sometimes with like some synth patches or whatever, it's kind of hard to actually like work out what the notes are being played. So he can just look at it and go, oh right, yeah, okay, it's that, and that. Again, which is helpful because neither of us know theory. I can't just say to him it's whatever, an E minor add 9. Apparently that is. Yeah, cool. Didn't know that, but now I know, and I won't retain that information. It's gone already. So yeah, that's kind of how we work, and it works well for us because, like, I don't know, our thing about, I don't know, like the big thing that we're into and what I guess our main passion is actually like making records, and like we play this stuff live, and a lot of this album was written to be more fun to play live. But having said that, it's very much like what we're trying to do is we're all about this, like the production process and the writing and the mixing and the putting together of records. Essentially, we're more about that, like crafting experiences than we are like taking what we do live in a room and just putting it on a record. We work it all out and map it all in software really rigorously, and then learn it and reverse engineer it in order to play it live, kind of thing. And the reason it works I mean, I'm not going to speak for Barney, but the reason it works really well for me is because I find like when I'm in a room like physically with other musicians and I'm like playing and jamming with them, I don't. I'm too fixated on making sure that I'm playing well and that my parts that I'm playing my parts well and that my sound of it is good that I don't. It's like you're not able to take that step back and really, I mean, you can hear everything that's going on with you, obviously, and like, if you're a bassist, you're going to play to a drummer and this kind of thing. But like, in terms of being able to analyze the whole structure and what the piece and how all the instruments are relating to each other, I find that really hard to do, like in real time, with a band in a room or with another musician in a room. It's just not something that like my brain's very good at. So, um, having it in this environment where you can sort of look at everything in real time and I can really pick apart details, um, just lends itself to our process a lot better than we just wouldn't be able to write this music if we were only getting in a room together and doing it all with just instruments and gear. I just don't think it would happen basically. So yeah, very much this is why we talk about this side of things on our socials and our Instagram so much, is because so much of the project is this. It's this is the process and this is what goes into it and this is like what we love about doing it. So yeah, anyway, sorry, I've waffled on a bit now. I hope that's kind of given some basic insight into like how things get started. And yeah, in another video, we'll keep going in on this track because obviously there's a lot more to cover in terms of how it gets developed, and particularly in terms of like the synth layers and tonal decisions with the synth and stuff like that, I guess. So yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. Cheers.